After d4, d5, c4, knight c6, knight c3, as mentioned in the previous videos, we go with knight f6. In this video we're going to go through bishop g5 now. What to do now? Pawn takes in c4 is the move to continue. And now we're going to go through two options. The bishop's idea, which was the whole point, basically bishop g5, the idea of taking a knight and mess up our pawn structure, which is not a problem. The other idea is d5. This is thematic. It's and it used to be quite an annoying move to meet, but it's actually okay for black. Another move would be e3 here with the bishop attacking this pawn, but this will give birth to a typical pattern that we've seen. If you're a Chigorin player and you've been following my videos, this is like video 13 or something, so you should know what to do now. It's e5, you got triple attack over d4. This forces white to take, but then you can swap everything, and after swap, knight e5 protects the pawn in c4, so this is good for black. And then white will have to go on with d5, but then black plays knight a5. So this is the line we're going to go through, but instead of going through this line with e3, basically white playing e3 now, we're going to go through d5, because it gives birth to the same type of scenario. Knight a5 comes now. So let's make a recap so that we understand this very well. Knight c6, knight c3, knight f6, and now the early bishop g5 move. Okay, we take the pawn in c4, and now we're going to look at two ideas. Bishop takes knight and pawn pushing. Okay, so let's look at a couple of lines. Okay, so let's start with this. Bishop takes f6. Now, this is stupid. The variation bishop g5 and bishop e6 is very popular, and they might want to play, but in reality, that's just fine for you. Just take back with the e-pawn. You got both bishops are releasable now. Bishop pair on the board. What else do you want? Now, white playing e3 with an attempt of capturing the pawn in c4 and developing the bishop, which is thematic, is met with knight to a5, and we're going to explore this type of move, knight a5, to defend this pawn widely in the next scenario. In this case, let's go through d5 immediately right now. This is met with knight to e5. The knight is sitting very well in e5, and a move like e3 now can come. And this time we don't have a knight in e5, but we have it in e5 with protecting this pawn. But white can play f4 later on, or maybe knight to f3 to kick the knight away. Black plays b5 now, and this is the move I wanted to show. Then we're going to go through the next line where we play knight a5 and explore the other patterns. b5, and now the pawn is secured forever. Black's got a pawn forever, there's nothing to do now. a4 can be one of the thematic moves, or we'll see what happens after knight takes. So after a4, simply play b4. There's an attack on a piece, so the knight has to move, and after knight to a2, attacking the pawn, bishop to b7, and let's remember that the knight is just putting pressure on the pawn, it's not actually attacking it because it's protected. The bishop in b7 is super well placed. Black managed to keep the pawn forever, and position is already evaluated as if black was up a piece. Best move according to the engine now would be knight to f3. Simply challenging this very strong knight. The idea is swapping it and then play bishop takes pawn in c4 and keep developing. However, we have a lot of attack over d5, and the best move now is queen takes d5. By the way, this was not possible to stop. Let's say if you were thinking about e4, solidifying the center, because black plays queen e7. So we'll get to that in a second. Let's go with this move now. Knight to f3. What to play? Okay, queen takes. And here there's nothing. If queen takes, then we take back, and we are still defending the pawn in c4, and the other bishop is defending pawn in b4. Pawn advantage, majority already. We've got 2 against 1 already. We can produce a passed pawn. Knight takes doesn't harm us in any possible way. It actually just doing us a favor. So let's go back to the position with bishop to b7. We mentioned white's best move according to the engine is knight f3, and what happens next? e4 seems more natural, but this is actually worse. Black goes on with queen e7, and the plan of playing long castle, even though it doesn't look good at all, but it's actually the idea. Let's say white plays knight f3, right? Developing. Okay, castle long. And now the plan is simply to take the pawn in d5, and guess what? That's unstoppable. And don't worry about knight taking in e5, because you can take back with the queen, putting pressure on e4. You don't have to worry about bishop taking in c4. So this knight cannot really remove the defender of c4. Once you take here, it's going to be game over. And in this position, obviously, rook d5 is the threat. If pawn takes back, then knight f3 is checkmate. To double check, and white king cannot move anywhere, so it's checkmate. And last but not least, f4 doesn't really do anything, because knight to g6 comes now. You got an attack here with the queen, an attack here with the knight. It looks like this can all be defended with queen to f3, but obviously you can take this pawn with the bishop, threatening so much stuff. Yeah, so position evaluated minus 350. It's just terrible for white. So let's move on to the other line by making a recap. So d4, d5, c4, knight c6, knight c3, knight f6. Okay, the early bishop g5 topic of today. Take the pawn, and after the bishop takes move, pawn takes back, the e-pawn, and after d5, knight e5, e3, and now b5. So we mentioned how a4 doesn't work because of b4. What happens if the knight takes the pawn? This is also wrong. Black plays rook to b8. Already here position is evaluated as if black was up a piece. Rook to b8, and obviously playing a4 doesn't help because when you attack the knight, then you are going to take the pawn in b2 no matter what. So after knight goes back to c3, rook takes b2, and there's nothing. You're going to play bishop b4 here. You're doing already so much better than white. That rook is not going to go away from that square. Rook b1 cannot challenge the rook simply because of the very cheeky bishop b4. This is so cheeky. The rook can't take the rook because then you will take the knight and you still be pinning the rook. So bishop takes and then rook d2. Now queen takes in d5. And the idea is to simply keep putting pressure on that rook. You're going to castle and play rook to d8. If white tries this crazy move king e2 simply to unpin the rook and swap everything, then bishop takes rook, queen takes back, and now knight to d3. Position is evaluated like minus 6 or something. That knight is there to stay. Black is just planning to castle, and this pawn is always going to support the knight. White should never try to even swap that knight because then we produce a very strong pass pawn and we can support it with the bishop and with the rook behind. So in this position, after rook takes the pawn in b2, rook b1 cannot challenge the rook. What happens after the thematic queen a4? Now there's double attack on the pawn in c4. All Queen's Gambit players know about this. Black plays queen to bishop to d7, and there's an attack on the queen, so you can't really go and take this pawn. And this is already winning for the black player. Queen a3 is not possible because of the bishop. Queen a5 is not possible because bishop b4 is a fork to these two pieces. Queen a6 doesn't do much, but either way you'll see what happens when the queen moves away. So queen to a7, still bishop b4 attacking the pinned piece. The king can't protect it. Nobody can protect this knight. And by the way, this move knight e2 to protect the knight is a positional suicide. Knight to d3 check, only move is king d1. Now check again with the knight. Then the king moves to c1 attacking the rook, but now check again. The king moves again, and now castle. Position evaluated minus 9. At this point, if white plays a3 attacking the bishop, then simply take the knight. Knight takes back, but now bishop g4 check. And you're going to have to block. If you block with the bishop with the idea of trying to develop, just remember you can't move anywhere. Look at the king. It's completely caged. White goes on with stunning queen to d5. Boom. It's an incredible move. Of course, knight cannot take back because bishop e2 is checkmate. And we're also threatening all sort of nasty discover attacks and checks. So let's stop that there. In this position, we mentioned how knight e2 is terrible, even if rook to c1 looks like a normal move to protect the knight, but still, bishop takes, rook takes, and now rook b1 check. If king moves to d2, you're winning a bishop. So that means the king has to go to e2, and now castle. And it's a terrible situation. After knight to f3 developing, maybe white wants to try and play g3 and bishop g2 or something, but still, nothing's going to work. Bishop to f5 comes now. You got this incredible threat, winning material. After knight to e5, also attacking the square e4, so now we have to take. And after white's playing best move, which is queen to c5, black wins, and black was already been winning, but still, queen to h4 comes now with pressure on the square f2, which is really important. So if white rook just takes the pawn in c4 with an attack on the queen, you're winning. You play this move, rook can't block because you've got double attack over that square, and you're infiltrating on f2 as soon as the king moves. And in this position, if g3 to stop the influence of the queen, still queen g4 is checkmate very soon. f3 is the only way to block, but now rook b2 check, and we are going to go to f3 no matter what. There's checkmate coming soon, it's inevitable. So from the start, d4, d5, c4, knight c6, knight c. Okay, the early bishop g5 move we're looking at, pawn takes, and now we're going to go through the other type of scenario, which is also one of the two main options, d5, attacking the knight. Okay, knight a5, and this pawn is there to be protected forever. Even after white's best move according to the engine, queen a4 check, we have to play c6 so that the queen can defend the knight. And after pawn takes, since we were planning to build a strong chain of b5 protected by the pawn, maybe even a6. And yeah, we've seen something like this in previous videos, so make sure you check them out in my channel. Knight c6, and now it looks like we have dropped this pawn, but black goes on with e5, and this is the best variation that white can go through, basically. Now let's look at two options before we close this video. One of them being rook to d1, attacking the queen and developing the rook. Seems to be making sense, but actually black's position now after queen b6, targeting this pawn, inducing the weakness of b3, which would be a terrible, terrible move. Position already evaluated -4 or -5 or something like that. Black goes on with bishop to e6 in this case, and the queen will have to move. Queen to a4, and bishop e4 is clearly coming, so you can take it from here. It's fantastic. Even if the queen had gone to, let's say, queen d3, black goes on either way with bishop to b4. And after e3, look, the white player can't castle the king anytime soon, and that's a big problem. So e3 loses the game immediately because of knight d5. And what happens if instead white plays e4 instead of e3? Okay, well, rook to d8, attacking the queen, and when the queen moves along, now here you can take the queen, swap, and then win the free piece. So if instead of e3 the queen had picked g3 to go to, now bishop takes knight, queen takes back, rook takes rook, king takes back, and knight takes e4 with an attack on the bishop, the queen, and the square f2 with an attempt of a fork. Can white stop all of these things at the same time? Well, definitely not. You also have the support of the queen over f2 and no counterplay from white. In this position, we mentioned how b3 is just completely wrong. It gives us so much the white's best move according to the engine is queen to b5. And now black goes on with the thematic bishop b4. It always happens. Now the idea is to win the queen for free, because the white player will not realize that his knight is pinned, right? Okay, what happens if queen takes queen? Okay, we take back, and we're already winning. We are winning here, believe it or not, because we're winning the pawn in a2 no matter what. This is inevitable. For example, a3 doesn't work. You take, pawn takes back, you're winning the pawn in a3. This is an isolated pawn. You're going to a comfortable and easy winning endgame. If white protects it with the rook to a1, then knight to d4 wins immediately. Rook to c1 to stop the threat of the fork is met by rook a2, so we're winning like that. And there's no e3 attacking the knight, knight to b3. It's becoming worse and worse. Rook saving itself from the knight, bishop to f5, attacking it. e4 doesn't work because the knight is pinned, so you can just take it. The rook moving away then means you can take the pawn in b2, and you're winning the knight as well afterwards, so you take it from there. The last recap we're going to go through is important as well, obviously, because we're going to show what happens after bishop takes knight, the most annoying piece on the board. So after bishop g5, we take the pawn, and after d5, we play knight a5. Okay, queen a4 check, c6, pawn takes, knight takes, queen takes pawn, e5. Earlier we went to rook d1. What happens after bishop takes knight? Okay, we take back with the queen, and it looks like we're giving some development or something to the white player, or maybe some counterplay, but in reality we are doing better already. So we're going to look at two moves before we close this video, knight d5 and knight b5 with an attempt of going to c7. A move like e3 here is met with bishop to b4, obviously. The pawn attacking the bishop is met with bishop e6 with development. Queen to e4, making sure not to go on the d file because of the attack of the rook, is met with bishop to f5, so the queen will have to go back. Queen to c4, and now we take the knight. Queen takes back. So we managed to play a normal game, especially after we castle and black and white plays knight f3. My position is evaluated like -3 after rook a to c8, so you can imagine that even that solid looking variation just didn't work because we got too much development. Now the idea obviously is knight to d4 with a discovered attack on the queen and an attack on c2. The only way for white to stop this, according to the engine, would be bishop c4, self-pinning. Black's best move now is b5, and this cannot be taken because of knight to d4. So many threats going on. And after b5, even if the bishop had gone back to b3, protecting the square c2 a little bit further, it doesn't make any difference because knight d4 comes anyway. And the queen can't just go to d2 to put more protection over c2 because knight simply takes the bishop and wins the game. And there's not really anything else to do. Queen to b4 does protect the bishop, but you can just attack the queen again, and that's going to be it. In this position, let's go through these two moves, knight d5, knight b5, because it looks like they win a tempo, and then we're going to close this video. Let's start with knight to b5, which actually loses on the spot. Bishop to b4, it's game over. If the king moves, the black player just castles, ignores c7, knight c7. It doesn't mean anything to us because rook d8 will be winning the game. Position evaluated -7 or something like that, I forgot. And after the bishop b4 check, if knight goes back to c3, look at the development we have now. Bishop to e6 comes with an attack on the queen. If queen goes to d3, rook to d8. This is a joke now, because we're also going to play knight d4, knight c2. And the queen can't just go and desperately try to swap stuff, because knight d4 comes. And we are doing this anyway. Queen taking in f6, swapping results in checkmate, knight c2. The rook is super strong on this file. After bishop e6, and queen goes to e4, stopping some ideas like e4 with double attack over the knight. Bishop to f5 comes now, and queen goes to e3, knight to d4, attacking the square. Rook c1 doesn't really help. I mean, you just play castle. You could have also done that, but like, let's see, knight to f3, attacking the knight, threatening to just swap this incredible knight. This is met with a super cheeky rook f to d8. Of course, knight taking knight is not really possible, because now you can take back with the pawn, and this is a fork you're winning material. If the bishop is attacked, surprisingly, you take the knight. And the rook takes you back, knight to c2. And here, white is forced to give up the exchange, and then bishop takes back. And if you think it's going to be one of those games where your opponent is down the exchange but has some counterplay, remember, you're threatening mate. So there's no counterplay. Knight to d2, stopping that for the moment. Still just play e4, and you're winning the pawn in b2. The knight can't really move from there. If queen goes to c3, swap the queen, then bring the other rook into the game. Position evaluated -6 or something. So even here, if g3 with the idea of developing the bishop, then castle, but still queen to b2, you're completely winning.